The first time I saw asteroid G772, I was in a darkened lab with a coffee that tasted like recycled air and stubborn hope. The feed from the Kepler array painted the rock in ghost silver, a knotted mountain of ice and nickel turning slow beyond Mars. The scan bled numbers that made everyone go quiet, platinum veins bright as a heartbeat. Iridium clustered in a way our textbooks said was rare, the kind of haul that could buy clean water for the places on Earth that still wait in line for it every morning. My name is Daniel Reyes. I am the mission physician and advisor for the Terran Minerals Council, which is a grand way of saying I patch up people in suits while lawyers argue about space rocks. I became useful to negotiators because I noticed details: breathing rates, tremors, sometimes the way a room begins to hold its breath before someone throws a verbal punch. We filed the claim within 6 hours. The counterclaim from the Trivka came 20 hours later, delivered with that warm greeting every young species gets once it touches something older species want. Their message said they had been tracking G772 for 10 years. Our telescope logs said otherwise, a paper trail clean enough to show a judge or a school class. Out here, truth is a tool, not a rule. The council shuffled the words that keep wars from starting and arranged peace talks aboard the Clark station that sits like a steel spine between Earth and Mars. 2 days later, the Trivka delegation arrived. Their shuttle looked like a hammered beetle shell, all blue ceramic tiles and confident posture. I stood with our team as the airlock cycled. Behind me, our lead negotiator, Morgan Hale, straightened a tie he only wore when the cameras were on. To my left, Sigurd breathed slow in his travel crate, white fur pressed against the bars, black nose taking in the station's clean cold. His handler, an old polar bear keeper named Anja, kept one hand on the crate door and her eyes on Sigurd like he was both her responsibility and her friend. We had argued for hours about bringing him. There are laws about animals in stations. There are laws about everything in stations. I cleared Sigurd medically to fly because he passed every welfare criteria we use for large carnivores: rested, hydrated, normal stool, no sedation past the initial transport dose 4 days back. He had been acclimated to the crate for months, vital signs steady, resting respiratory rate 9 breaths a minute, heart rate 28. For a male of his size and age, that is calm. We were not bringing a weapon, we were bringing a fact about Earth. The Trivka stepped through, 4 diplomats in layered fiber garments that shimmered like oil on water. Their leader introduced himself as Arbiter Chell. He carried his height the way a spear carries balance. Beside him moved their apex display. It came on 6 thick limbs, hide-plated with flexible armor that glinted bronze in the lights. If a boulder could learn to stalk, it would look like that. The handler, a thin Trivka with a cable winch at his waist, guided the creature with a chain that screamed symbolism and did nothing to control mass. The beast's breath smelled like hot metal and fermented copper. It loomed in the doorway just long enough to block the exits and let us understand the script. No one said it out loud. The message was clear enough to read without subtitles. We own the most dangerous thing our world ever birthed. Imagine what we could do to you. Morgan did not move. Anja did not move. Sigurd shifted his weight once, a lay of muscle under white fur like snow dunes hiding rock. I checked our sides breathing. 2 of our aides were breathing fast. I gave the quiet hand sign for slow inhale through the nose, long exhale through pursed lips. It works as well for panic as it does for altitude sickness. We let the Trivka set the stage. They placed their predator against the bulkhead in a way that forced anyone leaving to pass within its reach. Chell sat with his back to the emergency door. This is old human trickery too. Predators love to control exits. I took the chair at Morgan's right and put my medkit under the table. In it were gauze, hemostatic bandages, 2 tourniquets, a portable scanner, and ampoules of ketamine and midazolam for emergency sedation in case 100 things went wrong. You do not bring a polar bear aboard a station without planning for worst case. You do not bring yourself into a room with a 6-limbed tank without planning for the worst case. We started with the rock. Morgan laid our claim on the table in the way that makes lawyers breathe easier. He cited the Interstellar Exploration Protocol article that reads, "Like a promise if you squint, and like a threat if you underline it." Our astronomer ran a slow scroll of the telescope logs, dates, timestamps. Cross-references. Chell listened. He tapped a finger on the table at each point where his story bowed to ours. He only looked annoyed when Morgan mentioned the 10-year tracking assertion. Chell said his nation had tracked G772 through other means. He softened his voice, which any doctor will tell you is still stress. He called us a young species with a kind smile. He offered to mediate extraction. The word mediate wore the frame of own without having to say own. The apex beast shifted. The chain clinked against its collar. Its muscles rippled along the length of its body, with a wave that reminded me of a swimmer rolling into a turn. The handler let the chain slide slightly through his fingers, a magician's flourish that pretended to be restraint. The beast turned its head and fixed Sigurd's crate. The sound it made was a low hiss that sat against my ribs like a heavy instrument. Anja did not look at the alien. She looked at me. I checked Sigurd. He sat, weight on his haunches, ears forward, black eyes calm. Polar bears read rooms differently. They do not bark warnings. They do not bluff much. You do not see fear in a bear's eyes the way you do in a dog. You see math. The room. The exits. The moving parts. Sigurd's breath fogged the crate bars. The scent coming off him was fish oil and fur. He had eaten 2 hours earlier and he had not defecated since boarding. Practical notes keep you honest. Chell finally gave us the performance. He stood with a soft scrape of chair legs and spread his hands. He gestured to the predator and to us. His translator band lifted his words into our language with the small pauses that happen when concepts look at each other across a bridge. He said the beast was bred for control and fear. He said it had never known defeat. He said it obeyed without hesitation. He did not threaten. He did not need to. Morgan glanced to Anja. She nodded once and unlatched the crate. Sigurd stepped out without a chain, a white gravity moving through the room with paws soft enough to hide claws, until you saw the way the pads spread and knew those claws were there. He walked to a spot between our table and the Trivka and sat with his head leveled at our guests. He did not show teeth. He did not rumble. He did not blink more than he needed to. The room changed shape. The alien predator rose that fraction a predator gives before it closes distance. The handler paid out a link. The beast flowed forward half a pace, made that deep sound again, the kind that makes breakfast sit wrong in your stomach. Sigurd stood. He took one heavy step forward. The sound of his paw on the floor was a thump like a heartbeat turned into wood. He did not make any other sound. The alien predator looked away. It was quick, a tiny break in dominance mechanics, but it landed like a thunderclap. The handler stiffened. Chell's gaze flicked to me, then back to Sigurd, like he could not convince himself that his senses were telling him the right story. "This is not possible," Chell said. The translator gave the words without color. He added one of the small ritual phrases the Trivka used to bump politeness into a stone path. "Our apex fears nothing." "It's a polar bear," Morgan said. The way he said it made me remember the first time he had seen Sigurd at the zoo in Tromsø. The awe had been quiet then too. Chell lifted his chin. "We do not know this word." For a minute his delegation whispered in Trivka syllables that sounded like rain under steel. Then he turned back, a decision sitting on his shoulders. "We require proof. A duel. Your predator against ours. If you decline, we end this negotiation." Morgan leaned forward, limiting his movement to keep from triggering anyone's reflexes. "Fine. If they do not fight, we walk away from the table and from the deal." He turned his palms up, the universal sign for no tricks. "I assume you accept the same." Chell hesitated. There was a flash of something across his features I could not read. Reverence, maybe. Fear, maybe. He looked at his beast and back. Accepted. There were a dozen reasons to refuse. 100 diplomatic lectures say never set precedent with blood tests. But the room already had blood in it. Better to control the conditions and the aftermath than let someone else write what happened in a hallway with bad lighting. We moved. The Clark Station hangar is a rectangle the size of a small-town field with LED strips like winter sun and vents that can drop the temperature in minutes. I asked for 15. Anja asked for 20. Sigurd needed cold to work at full capacity. Polar bears are insulated against oceans. In warm air they overheat fast. We set the hangar at 1 degree Celsius. I had a stretcher prepped at the door, oxygen set to 15 liters per minute for high flow, a trauma cart with wide IV catheters, warmed saline, a defibrillator, and an ultrasound tablet. If Sigurd was injured, I would treat him like any large mammal in shock: airway, breathing, circulation. For hemorrhage, we had pressure dressings and tranexamic acid, which is safe in bears at dose adjusted by body weight. If a Trivka was injured, I would use the baseline medical profile their embassy had shared. Different blood salts. No acetaminophen. Avoid alcohol-based antiseptics. You do not get a second chance with cross-species assumptions. While crews cleared cargo and laid down non-slip panels, Anja briefed me in a low voice. Sigurd's history is not a footnote. He was born in captivity. He spent 8 years in a subarctic zoo. He killed another adult male that crossed into his territory at feeding time. That is not a moral failing. That is a bear being a bear. Sigurd does not posture. He ends things fast because in his world getting it wrong means drowning under broken ice. I watched the Trivka handlers walk their predator into the hangar. It paced a tight circle, neck plate sliding as it turned. It opened its mouth and let out a roar so bass-heavy the panels hummed. Its tongue was ridged, its teeth were thick. The smell of ozone came off it in waves, something in its sweat reacting with our air. The handler made a show of unhooking the chain and stepping back. The chain clattered to the deck like a dropped verdict. Sigurd padded in second. The cold made his breath smoke in clean rhythm. He flicked a glance at me like he wanted to know where I was, and then set his eyes on the center of the hangar. Anja walked a step behind him, hands loose, shoulders soft, voice low. She did not say his name. She never says it as a command. She says it as a promise. I checked my watch. We were 26 minutes from the end of our scheduled session. The station clocks would not care if we slipped, but the optics would. I looked across the hangar and met Chell's eyes. I saw in them not cruelty but certainty. He believed his world's story about its apex the way a child believes the rules of a game are carved into the ground. Morgan stood at my shoulder. He did not speak. None of us spoke. The hangar was a bowl holding quiet and cold and breath. The handlers backed away to the lines marked for safety. I confirmed the emergency doors were clear. I confirmed my kit was within reach. I ran one last checklist in my head the way surgeons do before a cut. Supplies ready. Team rolls clear. Vitals monitored when possible. Minimum people near the animals, except that once it starts you cannot control it. Then the Trivka handler lifted his hand. The alien predator's muscles gathered like a wave. We agreed on the signals. We agreed on the timekeeper. We agreed that there would be no second roar to start. The hangar waited while 2 apex lives found each other across 6 meters of polished floor and winter air. The alien predator broke the quiet first. It moved like a landslide, 6 limbs hammering the panels in a staccato that echoed around the hangar. Its armor plates flexed with each stride, catching the cold light in flashes. The claws on its forward limbs bit the flooring, leaving curling shards of synthetic resin behind. Its breath came in rapid gusts, each exhale heavy with the tang of scorched metal and something like vinegar. Sigurd didn't meet the charge head-on. He angled his body slightly, head lowered, eyes fixed on the alien's center mass. His paws made no sound, but I saw the ripple of his shoulder muscles as he shifted weight, the way an athlete coils before a throw. Anja stood just outside the hazard line, still as ice, only her eyes tracking every move. The alien's first lunge wasn't a strike, it was theater. It stopped a half-meter short, towering, head lowered, throat vibrating with a bass growl that made a few of our people shift uncomfortably. This was an intimidation play, common in apex behavior, testing the opponent's nerves without risking injury. Sigurd's answer was nothing. No growl, no display of teeth. He took a single step forward, slow and deliberate, his breath fogged in the air between them. The alien predator paused. I caught the fractional delay in its movement, then circled left, trying to force Sigurd into turning first. I knew the moment the Trivka handlers started to doubt. They'd been expecting recoil, maybe a bluff charge in return. But a predator that stands quiet in the face of aggression is one that doesn't see you as a true threat. The alien began to work itself into frustration, tail plates rattling, movements quicker, less economical. Sigurd's ears twitched once, a tiny adjustment, and then it happened. The alien darted in low from the side, a move meant to take advantage of its speed and the extra reach of its forelimbs. Sigurd pivoted over his rear paws, bringing his right forelimb across in a swipe that connected with the alien's muzzle. The sound cracked through the hanger like a pistol-shot claws meeting bone and armored hide in one decisive arc. The alien staggered back, more from surprise than the blow's impact, but it was enough. Sigurd was already moving, closing the gap before it could recover its stance. He hit the alien high, jaws locking over the thick joint at the base of its neck, where the plates met softer tissue. The pressure of his bite compressed down through skull and spine. I knew enough anatomy to understand that if the cervical vertebrae snapped, it was over instantly. And it was. The alien's limbs spasmed once, claws scraping against the floor in a fading rattle. Its breath stopped with a final hiss of air through its teeth. Sigurd held the bite for a few seconds longer, not for cruelty, but to make certain. Then he released, stepping back, blood streaking the white fur along his muzzle. He gave a brief shake of his head, as though dismissing the entire event as a waste of energy. I checked my watch. The whole engagement had lasted less than 12 seconds from the first forward step to the end. The Trivka handlers froze where they stood, chains slack in their hands. One of them made a soft keening noise, barely audible. Chel's expression didn't change at first, but I saw the twitch in his jaw, the kind that betrays a cascade of conflicting thoughts. Behind him, a junior delegate whispered something in their language. Later, our interpreter told me the phrase translated roughly to, "The worshipped has fallen." Anja walked up to Sigurd and rested a hand lightly on his shoulder. He was calm, breathing steady, no signs of overheating, heart rate still in the low 30s. I ran a quick check for injuries anyway, scanned his limbs for swelling, looked for any tears in the fur that might hide a puncture. Nothing. The alien predator had never landed a hit. The Trivka moved their beast's body to the side of the hangar in silence. Two of their people knelt beside it briefly, perhaps a cultural ritual, perhaps simply disbelief made still. Then Chel stood, gestured to his delegation, and without a word started toward the conference chamber. Morgan gave me a look that said, "Keep your kit ready." We followed. Back in the negotiation room, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The Predator's absence was its own presence. The space it had filled was now occupied by the quiet weight of what we'd all seen. Chel spoke first. His voice was still measured, but the subtle upward inflection at the end of each sentence was gone. "The asteroid belongs to you in full claim. No mediator." Morgan didn't gloat. He simply nodded, the way you acknowledge a mutual understanding. The formal documents were updated on the spot, both sides signing under the watch of the station's legal officers. No further debate, no final push for concessions. Sigurd had returned to his crate by then, resting with his head on his paws. Anja sat beside him, hand inside stroking his fur in slow passes. I noticed she kept glancing at him as though checking for delayed signs of strain. Polar bears can mask stress well, and she knew it. I checked 2 pink gums, steady breathing, no excess salivation, no tremors. The session wrapped without ceremony. The Trivka delegation left together, speaking in low tones. I overheard one word repeated more than once, a new one to me. Later, our linguists would tell us it was the beginnings of a new term in their language, Erskal, meaning white death from the ice. When the docking clamps released their shuttle, I felt my shoulders finally loosen. But I also knew this wouldn't be the end of it. An apex predator falling that quickly didn't just bruise pride, it rewrote an entire culture's understanding of power. That kind of shift doesn't fade quietly. We had the asteroid now, but we'd also just shown the galaxy something it might never forget. And Sigurd? He slept all the way back to his habitat module, the low rumble of his breathing steady as the hum of the station's life support. The station always feels different after a high-stakes meeting. Even without alarms or crowd noise, there's a shift: more people in corridors, quiet conversations by the viewports, the smell of brewed coffee running later into the artificial night cycle. That evening, Clark Station's hum felt heavier. Our delegation had gone their separate ways for the night. Morgan was in his quarters, already in a secure call with the Minerals Council. Anja had taken Sigurd to the habitat bay. We'd prepared a refrigerated enclosure, with a saltwater pool, reinforced flooring, and a small sleeping platform padded with mats. My job wasn't finished until I had a full post-event medical report for him. When I arrived, Sigurd was half submerged in the pool, eyes closed, floating with the slow rise and fall of breath. Anja was perched on a folding stool nearby, still in her insulated handler's gear, hands clasped loosely between her knees. "Any changes?" I asked. She shook her head. He's relaxed. Took a quick drink. No limping, no reluctance to move. I kept the temperature at -1°C. I crouched beside the pool. Sigurd opened one eye and gave me the briefest glance before letting it close again. I scanned him visually first. Symmetrical movements, no visible swelling, even coat, no mats of blood beyond the dried smears near his muzzle. Then I pulled out the portable ultrasound tablet. "Won't take long," I said, more for Anja's benefit than his. She reached into the pool, gently guiding him toward the edge. He didn't resist. Ultrasound gel spreads differently through wet fur, so I worked in small sections, forelimbs, chest, cervical area, abdominal sweep. The images came back clean. No internal bleeding, no fluid in the lungs, normal heart wall motion. I checked his core temperature with a rectal probe, 37.2°C. Right where a healthy adult male polar bear should be. While I worked, Anja finally said what had been sitting between us since the hangar. "They'll come back for him, won't they?" I looked up. "You mean to study him?" "To challenge him again. They can't leave it there. Not after what we saw." She wasn't wrong. In predator cultures, loss is a deep wound, but in political ones, public loss can turn into a vendetta. The Trivka had just watched the animal they called their apex collapse in under a minute. That would ripple through their media, their military myths, maybe even their planetary rituals. I finished the exam and wiped the gel from his fur. "We'll keep him here until we're sure the delegation's gone well clear of the system. Then he goes back to Tromsø. He's not a weapon, Anja. He's an animal who did what he does best." She didn't answer, just kept her hand resting on his shoulder while he floated. That night, the station's medbay pinged me with an advisory request. The Trivka had asked for immediate veterinary assistance with their fallen predator, not to revive it, which was impossible given the cervical damage, but to perform a joint post-mortem with human staff present. Morgan approved the request on the condition that all findings were recorded and shared. The next morning, I suited up for the hangar again. The alien predator's body was laid on a low, insulated platform. Up close without movement, it was enormous in a way you can't fully appreciate from a distance. Each limb was thick with muscle fibers, armor plates layered like the scales of a massive fish. The neck injury was exactly where I'd expected. Vertebrae C3 through C5 crushed, spinal cord severed, instant death. The Trivka medic, a narrow-shouldered individual named Carr, worked opposite me. We didn't speak much, just traded data as we progressed. Bone density scans, muscle fiber cross-sections, blood chemistry. What struck me was how similar their predator's vital architecture was to ours in function, oxygen transport, cardiac rhythm, but how specialized it had become for burst hunting. Huge glycogen stores in the muscles, but less endurance capacity. It was built to kill fast, but it wasn't built for prolonged strain in cold environments. By midday, the autopsy was complete. The official cause of death was listed as catastrophic cervical fracture with spinal transection, but in the room, Carr quietly said to me, "Your white beast did this without hesitation. Ours has faced no equal in centuries." The next days blurred into formalities, final document exchanges, secure data transfers about G772's mineral layout, orbital hazard agreements. The Trivka kept their tone measured but avoided all mention of predators, as if the duel had never happened. I knew better. Absence in diplomacy is often louder than presence. Before departure, Chell approached me privately. No translators, no aides. His voice was lower than I'd heard before. "The word has already spread to my world. They will teach children of the White Hunter from the ice. It will be told differently in every household, but they will not forget." And then he left, joining his people at the docking port without looking back. The morning after they were gone, I found Anja and Sigurd in the habitat bay again. Sigurd was sleeping on the platform, one paw twitching in some dream I couldn't guess. "He's clear to travel," I told her. "Vitals are steady, muscle tone normal. No reason to keep him here." She ran a hand through the fur at his neck. "Good. He's had enough of metal walls." I stayed a moment longer, watching the slow rhythm of his breath. Out in the black beyond Mars, G772 was still turning, patient as stone. We had the rights now. But what we'd bought with those rights wasn't just platinum and iridium. It was a story, one that might be retold far from Earth in ways we could never control. And somewhere, deep under alien skies, I suspected another predator species was already training for a rematch. We were back on Earth less than a week later. Tromsø's air hit like a reminder that not all cold is artificial. Snow crusted along the fjord, and the wind carried the smell of salt and pine. Sigurd padded out of his transport crate and into his outdoor enclosure without hesitation, nose lifting to taste the air. Anja had stocked the pool and scattered a few frozen salmon across the rocks, a welcome home ritual. From a distance, nothing looked different. But inside every news terminal, the duel was everywhere. Clips of the fight were cut into 10-second bursts on the major networks. A still frame of Sigurd standing over the alien predator's body had already become a global image, equal parts awe and controversy. On my second day back, I was summoned to the Minerals Council's headquarters in Oslo. The meeting room was warm enough that my jacket felt heavy, but the tone inside was far from comfortable. Morgan was there, along with a half-dozen council members, several of whom looked like they hadn't slept much. "Daniel," Morgan said, gesturing to an open chair, "we're dealing with the fallout now." I took my seat. "I figured as much. What's the problem? We have the rights." Councillor Viken leaned forward, tapping a finger against the table. "Yes, and now every major trade partner is asking why we brought a lethal apex predator into a diplomatic setting. The footage makes it look like premeditation." "It was premeditation," I said evenly. "Not to kill, to match the intimidation they brought. Without Sigurd, the talks wouldn't have been on equal ground." Another counselor spoke up. "The Trivka are publicly silent. That worries me more. No condemnation, no demand for restitution, just silence." It wasn't silence. It was recalibration. I'd seen it before in human negotiations after a loss, the time spent rewriting the story so that the next move looked inevitable. That evening, I got a secure message from an off-world contact in the Interstellar Relations Office. It contained intercepted Trivka broadcasts from their homeworld. The term Airskal, white death from the ice, was appearing everywhere. In political speeches, on public murals, even in music. It was being framed as both a cautionary tale and a call to adapt. The duel wasn't vanishing from their history. It was becoming part of it. 2 weeks later, I returned to Tromsø to check on Sigurd. He was in peak condition, coat thick, gait strong, no muscle wasting. Anja had kept him active with enrichment routines. Frozen carcasses to tear, scent trails to follow, hours in the water. "He hasn't changed," she said as we walked the perimeter of the enclosure. "Maybe not on the outside," I said, "but animals remember. He'll remember that fight, and so will they." That night, we sat in her small cabin overlooking the fjord. A kettle hissed on the stove. She asked the question I'd been avoiding since the day we left Clark Station. "Do you think they'll come back for him?" I thought of Kjell's words, the quiet weight in his voice. "Not for revenge. Not directly. But they'll test us again, maybe not with animals next time. Maybe with something we can't match with teeth and claws." She stared into her cup for a long moment. "Then I hope the next story ends without blood." Spring crept in slow that year. The ice on the fjord broke in wide sheets, the sun lingering a little longer each day. News of the asteroid mining operations began to overshadow the duel, at least on Earth. Platinum forecasts, new orbital jobs, economic projections. But the deeper I read into the reports from the diplomatic corps, the more I saw the duel's shadow in unrelated negotiations. A subtle shift in how other species approached us, more caution, more careful choice of words, as if they'd learned we were unpredictable in ways they couldn't quantify. On my last visit to Sigurd, before leaving for another posting, I stood at the edge of his enclosure as he emerged from the pool, water streaming off his coat in silver arcs. He came to the fence and watched me for a moment, head slightly tilted. "You changed more than you know," I said quietly. He huffed once, not in recognition, but in the simple act of being alive in the cold air. Then he turned and padded away toward the rocks. The Trivka never challenged our claim to G772 again. The mining began without interference, and the first shipments of ore were already en route to orbital refineries. But somewhere out there, under skies I've never seen, children were hearing a story about a white predator from a frozen world who stood